The airplane that would become one of the worst heavy bombers in history began its life as a promise, shining under factory lights in the United States, a symbol of everything aviation hoped to be in the late 1930s. It was meant to carry people, not bombs. It was meant to cross oceans smoothly, not struggle to lift itself from a runway, and yet, quietly, almost carelessly, America let it go. In 1938, Douglas Aircraft unveiled something ambitious. The DC-4E was huge for its time, a four-engine airliner designed to carry passengers farther and more comfortably than anything before it. It had pressurization ideas, advanced systems, and a wide fuselage that hinted at the future of long-haul flight. But it was also expensive, complicated, and heavy. Airlines looked at it, ran the numbers, and stepped back. It was too much airplane for a world not yet ready for it, so Douglas did something simple. They sold it. The buyer was Japan. Officially, it was a civilian purchase, an evaluation aircraft. Unofficially, everyone involved understood the truth. Japan was watching the skies closely. War was approaching, even if it had not yet been declared. Every new machine mattered, and foreign designs were studied like captured secrets. When the DC-4E crossed the Pacific and arrived in Japan, it did not arrive as a failed airliner. It arrived as a teacher. Japanese engineers dismantled it with care. They measured every rib, every spar, every system. They studied its size, its structure, its promise. What they saw was tempting. Here was a large, long-range aircraft, something Japan desperately wanted for its growing empire. The Imperial Japanese Navy imagined a heavy bomber that could reach far beyond its shores, carrying massive payloads deep into enemy territory. The DC-4E looked like the shortcut to that dream, but the dream misunderstood the machine. The DC-4E had been rejected for a reason. It was too heavy for its engines. It struggled with reliability. It demanded precision manufacturing and maintenance standards that even American airlines found impractical. Japan, facing resource limitations and industrial pressures, was about to force this design into a role it was never meant to play. The result was the Nakajima G5N, later called Shinzan, the mountain tremor. On paper, it sounded terrifying. A massive four-engine bomber, long-range, heavy payload, meant to rival America's B-17 and B-24. In reality, it was an aircraft fighting itself every moment it existed. The engines were underpowered. Takeoffs were long and dangerous. Climb rates were poor. Reliability was worse. Each flight felt less like a demonstration of strength and more like an argument between gravity and hope. The fuselage, borrowed in spirit from a passenger airliner, was not optimized for combat. Defensive armament was awkward. The structure was heavy where it needed to be light and fragile where it needed to be strong. Modifying a civilian concept into a military weapon demanded compromises Japan could not afford to make. As the war intensified, the problems multiplied. Resources grew scarce. Skilled labor vanished into the front lines. Engine development lagged behind Allied advances. While American bombers rolled off assembly lines by the thousands, the Shinzan limped through testing, never quite ready, never quite safe. Only a handful were ever built. Some were converted into transport aircraft, stripped of their bomber ambitions just to make them useful for something. Others barely flew at all. The heavy bomber meant to project Japanese power across the Pacific became a quiet embarrassment, rarely mentioned, quickly overshadowed by more practical designs. What makes the story linger is how small the decision was at the start. An American company sells an experimental airliner because it doesn't fit the market. No headlines, no urgency, just business. Yet that rejected airplane crossed an ocean and reshaped another nation's expectations, leading to years of effort, wasted resources, and an aircraft that never fulfilled its purpose. The irony is sharp but silent. America discarded the DC-4E, learned from it, simplified it, and eventually produced the DC-4 and C-54, aircraft that would help win the war through transport and logistics. Japan took the same inspiration and chased a bomber dream that technology, industry, and reality would not allow. In the end, the worst heavy bomber in history was not born from bad intentions or lack of intelligence. It was born from misunderstanding, a belief that size alone meant power, a belief that copying form could replace understanding function. And all of it began with a quiet transaction when America let go of an airplane it no longer wanted, never imagining where it would land or what history it would quietly fail to make. Even within Japan, the Shinzan story unfolded slowly, almost apologetically. Test pilots spoke of it in careful language, never outright condemning it, but never praising it either. They described how the aircraft felt heavy on the controls, how it needed long stretches of concrete to rise into the air, how any engine trouble instantly became a crisis. In an era when Japan prized agility, speed, and daring designs, this lumbering giant felt foreign, like a borrowed suit that never quite fit. Engineers tried to fix it. They always try. More powerful engines were proposed, then delayed. Structural changes were sketched, then abandoned. Every solution added weight. Every attempt to strengthen the airframe made performance worse. The bomber grew more complex without growing more capable. It became trapped in a loop where improvement only deepened its flaws. Meanwhile, the war did not wait. By the early 1940s, Japan's strategic needs had shifted. The quick victories of the opening campaigns gave way to long supply lines, attrition, and a growing realization that industrial output mattered more than daring plans. The Shinzan belonged to a different vision of war, one that assumed overwhelming reach and decisive blows. Reality demanded practicality, numbers, and reliability. The bomber offered none of these. When compared to American heavy bombers, the contrast was painful. The B-17 was not perfect, but it was rugged. The B-24 was not elegant, but it was fast and mass-producible. Both were designed from the beginning to be bombers, shaped by combat requirements and refined through relentless iteration. The Shinzan, by contrast, carried the ghost of its civilian origins in every panel and frame. It had never been taught how to fight. Even its name felt heavy with irony. Mountain Tremor suggested something unstoppable, something that shook the earth by its mere presence. But the aircraft rarely left the ground, and when it did, it left no mark. It trembled itself, vibrating under strain, engines roaring at full power just to maintain altitude. Some Shinzan airframes were reassigned to transport duties, hauling cargo instead of bombs. In that role, they were still inefficient, but at least they were not pretending to be something they were not. Even then, maintenance crews struggled to keep them operational. Spare parts were scarce. Engines wore out quickly. Each flight was a calculation of risk. As American bombing intensified, Japan's skies filled with enemy aircraft that worked, bombers that returned riddled with holes, bombers that flew again the next day. The Shinzan sat on airfields, silent witnesses to what it had failed to become. It was not shot down in great numbers because it was barely ever sent into harm's way. There is something haunting about weapons that never see battle. They absorb effort, time, and belief only to fade quietly. No dramatic losses, no heroic last stands, just abandonment. After the war, the Shinzan disappeared almost completely from memory. No preserved examples. No famous missions, no place in popular history. It existed in documents, photographs, and the recollections of engineers who likely wished they had chosen differently. Compared to legendary aircraft, it felt like a footnote that barely deserved ink. Yet its story matters precisely because of that failure. It reveals how technology cannot simply be transplanted across cultures, industries, and purposes without consequence. It shows how desperation can magnify ambition beyond practicality. And it shows how a single rejected design, misunderstood and repurposed, can become a symbol of misalignment between vision and reality. Back in the United States, the lessons of the DC-4E took a different path. Douglas stripped away complexity, simplified systems, reduced weight, and focused on what actually worked. The result became one of the most important transport aircraft of the war, moving troops, fuel, food, and hope across continents. The same routes produced success and failure, depending entirely on how they were understood. The Shinzan never had that chance. It was born from admiration rather than mastery, from urgency rather than patience. Every time its engines turned, it carried the weight of a decision made years earlier, when a promising airliner was judged too advanced, too costly, too heavy, and quietly sold away. And somewhere in that long chain of cause and effect, history's worst heavy bomber took shape, not in a single mistake, but in many small ones, layered gently on top of each other, until the aircraft itself became an echo of what happens when ambition outruns understanding, and an airplane meant to carry passengers across peaceful skies is asked to carry the impossible instead. What makes the Shinzan's failure even more striking is how rare such opportunities were. Japan did not often gain access to cutting-edge foreign aircraft in complete, flyable form. This was not a set of blurry photographs or intelligence reports filtered through rumor. This was metal, wiring, hydraulics, and air flowing over wings that had already flown. And yet, the deeper engineers went, the more the aircraft revealed a quiet truth. It was a product of a different industrial philosophy. American aircraft design in the late 1930s was already leaning towards standardization, modular systems, and production scalability. Even experimental designs were built with future refinement in mind. Japanese industry, by contrast, excelled at precision and craftsmanship, but struggled with mass production of complex systems. The DC-4E demanded uniformity, consistency, and engines that could be produced in large numbers with identical tolerances. That world did not yet exist in Japan, so the Shinzan became a contradiction. It was large but fragile, advanced but unreliable, ambitious but impractical. Each subsystem depended on another performing perfectly, and perfection was impossible under wartime pressure. A minor fault could cascade into a major failure. Pilots learned to treat it gently, as if the aircraft itself were uncertain of its own existence. Even the choice of engines reflected the trap Japan had walked into. The available power plants simply could not give the aircraft what it needed. Engineers compensated with higher power settings, which led to overheating, wear, and shortened engine life. Every flight consumed the future of the machine a little more. The bomber was not just underperforming, it was slowly wearing itself out. As the Pacific War stretched on, priorities hardened. Japan no longer needed a theoretical long-range bomber. It needed fighters to defend cities, interceptors to challenge high-altitude raids, and aircraft that could be built quickly by less experienced workers. The Shinzan fit none of these needs. It was too big, too slow to develop, and too demanding to maintain, and so it was sidelined quietly and without ceremony. There is something deeply human about this moment. Entire teams had worked on the aircraft. Careers had been invested in it. Pride had been wrapped around its name and purpose. Yet reality does not negotiate. The war did not pause to allow a troubled bomber to mature. It moved on indifferent. By 1945, Japan's skies were dominated by American bombers flying in formations that seemed endless. The Shinzan, conceived as an answer to that threat, never truly met it. It watched from the ground, an observer rather than a participant. In some airfields, its size made it difficult even to hide, forcing crews to park it away from runways, hoping camouflage and luck would be enough. When the war ended, destruction erased many physical traces of the aircraft. Scrap shortages meant airframes were dismantled. Records were lost or destroyed. The Shinzan slipped into obscurity not because historians ignored it, but because it left so little behind to remember. Yet the idea of it lingers. It stands as a reminder that technology is not neutral. A design carries the assumptions of its creators, the infrastructure of its birthplace, and the purpose it was shaped to serve. Remove it from that environment, force it into a new role, and those assumptions become liabilities. The DC-4E had been rejected, but it was not wrong. It was simply early. Japan tried to turn that early idea into a weapon, and in doing so, exposed every weakness at once. History often celebrates success, but failure tells quieter, richer stories. The Shinzan does not roar through memory like famous bombers. It does not have heroic missions or legendary last stands. Instead, it whispers about decisions made under pressure, about copying without context, about believing that size alone could overcome limits. Somewhere in that whisper is the sound of an airliner crossing the Pacific for the last time, its civilian future already behind it, its military future misunderstood. It was an airplane that carried no passengers, dropped no decisive bombs, and won no battles. Yet its journey connects two nations, two industries, and two very different outcomes born from the same set of wings. And that is how history's worst heavy bomber did its most lasting work, not in the sky, but as a lesson grounded in metal, silence, and the weight of what might have been.